The slap rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. The 5-year-old boy hit the wooden floor hard, blood already welling from his split lip. 20 people stood frozen in the cold hall of the Cheyenne orphanage, watching. Not one moved to help. Not one spoke in protest. They had learned long ago that interfering with Silas Thornton was dangerous. The boy, small for his age, with honey-colored hair and enormous blue eyes now filling with tears, didn't cry out. He had learned that lesson too. Crying only made it worse. "What did I tell you?" Silas Thornton towered over the child, his face twisted with rage. He was a gaunt man of 45, all sharp angles and harder edges, wearing the black coat of the orphanage director like a uniform of authority. "What did I tell you about asking questions?" The boy's lips trembled, but he stayed silent. "Answer me!" Silas raised his hand again. "I just wanted to know when we could go home," the boy whispered, the words barely audible. Fresh blood dripped onto his worn shirt. "I miss Mama." "You don't have a home." Silas's voice cracked across the room. "Your mama is dead. Your whole family is dead except these worthless siblings of yours. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone." 6 other children stood in a ragged line against the far wall, ranging in age from 3 to 14. They wore clothes that had been mended too many times, shoes with holes, faces marked by hunger and fear. This was what remained of the Crawford family. 7 children nobody wanted. The oldest, a boy of 14 with dark hair and his father's strong jaw, took a half step forward, fists clenched. His name was Benjamin Crawford, and fury burned in his eyes. A girl of 12, Catherine, grabbed his arm. She shook her head once, sharp and final. They couldn't afford his anger right now. Not here. Not with what was at stake. Benjamin froze, every muscle in his body tight with the need to protect his brother. But he stayed in line. His younger siblings needed him thinking, not fighting. The orphanage hearing room was a cheerless space on this December 15th in 1885. High windows let in weak winter light that did nothing to warm the cold air. Wooden benches lined both sides where the good citizens of Cheyenne sat to observe the proceedings. At the front, behind a massive oak desk, sat Judge Cornelius Blackwood, a man of 58 with silver hair and the kind of face that spoke of authority and wisdom. It was a lie. Behind those grandfatherly features lurked something far less benevolent. But the people of Cheyenne didn't know that. To them, Judge Blackwood was a pillar of the community, a man who had founded the orphanage out of Christian charity, who gave homeless children food and shelter and the chance at a better life through adoption into good families. What they didn't see were the ledgers hidden in his office. The careful accounting of which children were rented out to which ranches as unpaid labor. The percentage he collected from families who wanted workers, not sons and daughters. The system he had built where orphans became commodities, bought and sold like cattle. The Crawford children represented a problem. 7 siblings. The law said they should stay together if possible, but no one wanted 7 children. Too many mouths to feed, too much trouble. So Judge Blackwood had a solution. Today's hearing would officially declare them unadoptable as a group. Then they would be separated, sent to different ranches across Wyoming, and the judge would collect his fees. It was practical, it was profitable, and it was perfectly legal. Silas Thornton stepped back from the bleeding child, smoothing his coat with hands that still trembled with rage. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he said, addressing the line of children. "You are here because you have nowhere else to go. You will be grateful for whatever placement the court sees fit to give you. And you will not ask questions." Little Luke Crawford, still on the floor, wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His older brother Michael, a boy of 10 with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much, started toward him, then stopped. Movement drew attention. Attention brought punishment. In the back row of benches, almost hidden in shadow, a man stood up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical work. His age was difficult to guess, somewhere past 40 but not yet old, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes of such pale blue they seemed almost colorless in certain light. He wore a leather coat of obvious quality, well-made boots, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from never having to prove himself. His name was Ethan Cole Mackenzie, and he was the richest man in Wyoming. He stepped into the aisle, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silas Thornton looked up, irritation crossing his features. "Sir, this is a closed hearing. If you're not here on official business, I'll have to ask you to leave." Ethan didn't respond. He walked down the aisle with measured steps, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Every eye in the room tracked his movement. When he reached Luke, he knelt down beside the boy with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his size. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, pitched low so only Luke could hear. Luke stared at him with wide, frightened eyes, too scared to answer. Ethan pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and carefully wiped the blood from the boy's face. The split lip would heal. The fear in those blue eyes would take longer. "I need you to stand up now," Ethan said, still in that same calm tone. "Can you do that for me?" Luke nodded and scrambled to his feet, never taking his eyes off this stranger who had touched him with kindness. Ethan stood as well, placing himself between Luke and Silas Thornton. When he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the room, cold as December wind off the mountains. "Touch that child again and I will break your hand." Silas went pale, then red. "How dare you? This is none of your concern. These children are wards of the state, and I am their appointed guardian until adoption placement is finalized. You have no authority here." "I have money," Ethan said. "In Wyoming, that's all the authority I need." He pulled a leather wallet from his inside pocket and withdrew a thick stack of bills. The people on the benches leaned forward, eyes widening. That was more cash than most of them saw in a year. Ethan walked to Judge Blackwood's desk and set the money down with a solid thump that echoed in the silent room. $2,000, he said. "I'm buying all 7. The room erupted. Voices rose in shock and confusion. Judge Blackwood's face drained of color, going from ruddy to pale gray in seconds. "Mr. Mackenzie," the judge said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "This is not a livestock auction. We don't sell children. This is an adoption hearing governed by the laws of Wyoming Territory." "I know exactly what this is," Ethan replied, his pale eyes fixed on the judge with an intensity that made the older man shift in his seat. "I also know what you've been doing with these children. The ranches that suddenly have extra workers who aren't on any payroll. The families who take in orphans and work them 16 hours a day. The percentage you collect from every placement." Judge Blackwood's face hardened. "Those are serious accusations with no proof." "I have ledgers." Ethan's voice didn't rise, but somehow it filled the room. 3 years' worth of your private accounts. Names, dates, amounts. I've had investigators watching you for 6 months. One word from me, and the territorial marshal will be very interested in your Christian charity. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Blackwood's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. His carefully constructed reputation, his position, his entire operation hung in the balance. He looked at the money, then at Ethan Mackenzie, then at the 7 children standing terrified against the wall. "What do you want?" The judge's voice was barely a whisper. "I want an adoption hearing," Ethan said. Right now. Legal and binding. All 7 children placed in my custody. The law requires extensive review for single men seeking to adopt. Background checks, home inspections, character witnesses. It takes months. Then you'd better work fast, Ethan said. Because if I walk out of here without those children, my next stop is the marshal's office. Your choice, Judge. Orphans or prison? A woman's voice cut through the shocked silence from the back of the room. $2,500 for 8 orphans? Ethan, have you lost your mind? Victoria Sterling stood near the back entrance, draped in furs that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her face was beautiful in the way of porcelain dolls, cold and perfect and utterly without warmth. Beside her stood her niece Annabelle, a pretty blonde girl of 24 who looked acutely uncomfortable with her aunt's interruption. This is not your concern, Victoria, Ethan said coldly, not even turning to look at her. It's everyone's concern when the wealthiest man in Wyoming makes a spectacle of himself. Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness. These children need proper families, not a lonely bachelor's charity project. You want a family, Ethan? Marry Annabelle. She'll give you legitimate heirs, not these damaged cast-offs. Ethan finally turned, his pale eyes fixing on her with such intensity that Victoria actually took a step back. Get out of my way. Victoria's expression hardened. You'll regret this, Ethan. Mark my words. I have influence in this town, and I will not stand by while you destroy your reputation over orphans. She swept from the room, pulling Annabelle behind her, but her threat hung in the air like smoke. Judge Blackwood cleared his throat, trying to regain control of his courtroom. He looked around at the watching townspeople, at Silas Thornton, who had gone white as snow, at the children who represented his profits. He was trapped, and he knew it. Very well, he said, defeat heavy in his voice. We'll convene a formal hearing, 2 o'clock this afternoon. That gives me time to prepare the necessary documentation and call witnesses. 1 o'clock, Ethan countered. And Judge, if anything happens to those children between now and then, if they suffer so much as a harsh word, you'll answer to me personally. Are we clear? The judge nodded, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. Ethan turned to face the 7 children. They stared back at him with a mixture of hope and terror. Hope because someone had finally stood up for them. Terror because they had learned not to trust adults who made promises. The oldest boy, Benjamin, stepped forward slightly, positioning himself as a barrier between this stranger and his siblings. Even at 14, his protective instincts were strong. Who are you? Benjamin's voice cracked with adolescence and suspicion. Why are you doing this? My name is Ethan Mackenzie, he replied. I own the largest ranch in Wyoming, and I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. People don't help for no reason, Benjamin shot back. His brown eyes were hard with distrust learned through bitter experience. What do you want from us? It was a fair question. Ethan didn't blame the boy for asking. I want to give you what I lost, he said quietly. A family. Catherine, the 12-year-old girl, clutched the youngest child tighter. Rose was only 3, too young to understand what was happening, her thumb in her mouth and her eyes heavy with the nap time that had been interrupted by this chaos. We don't have a family, Catherine said, her voice small but steady. Mama died having Rose. Papa died of consumption 6 years before that. Uncle Frank took us in, but then his horse kicked him and he died too. We don't have anybody. You have each other, Ethan said. And if the court approves it this afternoon, you'll have me. A girl stood slightly apart from the others, almost in shadow near the wall. She was perhaps 9 or 10, thin as a rail, with light brown hair that hung in tangles around a face marked by an old burn scar that covered her left cheek and part of her neck. She had been so still, so silent, that Ethan almost hadn't noticed her. You're not one of them, he said, studying her. Not a Crawford. The girl flinched as if he'd struck her. No, sir, she whispered. I'm Abigail Harper. I've been here 2 years, since the smallpox took my parents. Why hasn't anyone adopted you? The girl's hand moved unconsciously to her scarred face. I'm defective, sir. That's what Mr. Thornton says. Nobody wants damaged goods. Rage, cold and controlled, flooded through Ethan. He kept his voice level with effort. Do you want to come with them? With the Crawfords? Abigail's eyes went wide with shock. Me, sir? You heard me. Yes or no? The girl looked at the 7 Crawford children, then back at Ethan. Hope warred with disbelief on her young face. Why would you want me? Her voice was so quiet he had to lean down to hear. I'm not pretty. I can't do much work. My face scares people. Ethan knelt so he was eye level with her. Your face tells me you're a survivor, he said. That you lived through something that would have killed a weaker person. That's not defective. That's strong. So I'll ask again. Do you want to come? Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks, tracking through the dust and grime. She nodded, unable to speak. Ethan stood and addressed Judge Blackwood again. 8 children, he said. $2,500. And Judge, when this is over, you're going to resign your position and leave Wyoming. Because if you ever hurt another child, I won't go to the marshal. I'll handle it myself. The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. Judge Blackwood's face twisted with impotent fury, but he was beaten and knew it. 1 o'clock, he repeated. Don't be late. Ethan walked back to the children. They watched him approach with the wariness of abused animals, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I need to go prepare for the hearing, he told them. Mr. Thornton and his staff will take you to lunch and make sure you're cleaned up for court. If anyone lays a hand on you, if anyone says one cruel word, you tell me this afternoon. Understand? Benjamin nodded slowly. What if the judge doesn't approve? What if you can't take us? It was the question they were all thinking. Hope was dangerous when you'd been disappointed so many times. Ethan met the boy's eyes steadily. Then I'll find another way, he said. I don't quit, and I don't break promises. You're going to learn that about me. He turned and walked out of the orphanage hearing room, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The door closed behind him with a solid thunk. The children stood in stunned silence. For the first time in longer than they could remember, something that felt dangerously like hope stirred in their chests. But Benjamin, who had buried both parents and an uncle, who had held his siblings together through starvation and grief and more pain than any 14-year-old should know, refused to let himself believe. Don't trust him, he whispered to Catherine. People like us don't get rescued. He'll change his mind. They always do. Catherine looked at the door where Ethan Mackenzie had disappeared, then down at little Rose sleeping against her shoulder, then at Luke still wiping blood from his mouth. Maybe, she said quietly. But maybe not. Maybe this time is different. Benjamin wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe. But 6 years of loss had taught him that hope was the cruelest lie of all. In the back of the room, Silas Thornton stood trembling with rage and humiliation. $2,500. That was more than he made in 2 years. And Judge Blackwood was going to let that arrogant rancher walk in and take 8 children, just like that, unless the hearing this afternoon went differently than Mackenzie expected. There were still ways to stop this. Legal ways. The law favored married couples for adoption, not single men. Especially not single men trying to adopt 8 children at once. It was unprecedented. Unnatural. Silas smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Ethan Mackenzie might have money, but Silas Thornton had the law on his side. And before this day was over, those 8 ungrateful brats would learn what happened when they dared to hope for something better. The Crawford children and Abigail Harper didn't see Thornton's smile. They were too busy trying to process what had just happened, trying to decide if the tall man with the cold blue eyes and the gentle hands was their salvation, or just another disappointment waiting to break their hearts. Outside, snow began to fall on Cheyenne, covering the dirt and ugliness in a blanket of white. Inside the orphanage, 8 children waited for 1 o'clock, for a hearing that would decide if they stayed together or were torn apart forever. And somewhere in town, Ethan Cole Mackenzie was preparing for the fight of his life. The wagon lurched over frozen ruts as the horses pulled their cargo through the late afternoon snow. 8 children huddled under blankets that Ethan had produced from somewhere, thick wool that smelled of cedar and horses and the promise of warmth. The hearing had lasted 2 hours. Judge Blackwood had tried every legal maneuver he could think of, citing precedent after precedent about single men and large adoptions and the need for maternal influence. But Ethan had brought his own lawyer, a sharp-minded woman from the territorial capital who dismantled every argument with brutal efficiency. In the end, the judge had no choice. The adoption was approved. Temporary custody for 30 days, with a final review scheduled for mid-January. It was the best Ethan could hope for, and more than the children had dared to dream. Now they were leaving Cheyenne behind, heading into the wilderness where the Mackenzie Ranch waited like a promise they didn't quite trust. Luke pressed his face against the wagon side, watching the town disappear behind them. "How far is it?" "About 30 miles, Ethan replied from horseback beside the wagon. He'd hired one of his ranch hands to drive while he rode alongside. "We should arrive just after dark." 30 miles, Benjamin repeated, his voice flat. That was 30 miles from everything they'd ever known. 30 miles from any hope of going back if this didn't work out. Catherine sensed his fear because she felt it too. She pulled Rose closer, the 3-year-old's weight warm and solid against her chest. Michael sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched, waiting for the next bad thing to happen, because bad things always happened. Emma pressed herself into the corner of the wagon, silent as a ghost, her eyes tracking everything but revealing nothing. Abigail sat apart from the Crawfords, still not quite believing she'd been included in this miracle. The landscape changed as they traveled. Open prairie gave way to rolling hills, then to the foothills of the mountains that dominated the western horizon. Snow covered everything, broken only by the dark lines of fence posts marking property boundaries. "How much land do you own?" Benjamin asked, breaking his self-imposed silence. 20,000 acres, Ethan replied. "Most of it grazing land for cattle. Some timber in the high country. Good water from the mountain runoff." Benjamin did the math in his head. 20,000 acres was larger than some eastern states, larger than anything he could properly comprehend. "That's a lot of fence to maintain." Ethan looked at him with new respect. Most 14-year-olds wouldn't have made that connection. "It is. I employ 30 men year-round. More during spring branding and fall roundup." "What happens if we don't work out?" The question came from Michael, sharp and challenging. "What happens in 30 days if you decide 8 kids are too much trouble?" "That won't happen." "But what if it does?" Ethan reined his horse closer to the wagon, his pale eyes finding Michael's. "Then I'll have failed you, not the other way around. You understand that? If this doesn't work, it's my failure, not yours." Michael didn't respond, but something shifted in his expression, like he'd expected anger at his challenge and didn't know what to do with patience instead. As the sun set, the landscape opened up into a wide valley, and there, nestled against the foothills with mountains rising behind it like protective walls, sat the Mackenzie Ranch. Catherine gasped. She couldn't help it. The main house was enormous, 2 stories of solid timber with a wraparound porch and green shutters on every window. Smoke rose from 3 different chimneys, promising warmth. Surrounding the house were barns, stables, bunkhouses, corrals containing more horses than Catherine had ever seen in one place. Lamplight glowed in windows, turning the snow gold. It looked like something from a storybook. The kind of place where happy families lived happy lives, where children grew up safe and loved and whole. It looked like a lie because places like that didn't exist for children like them. "This is your home?" Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "It's our home now," Ethan corrected gently. "If you want it to be." The wagon pulled into the main yard. Immediately, people emerged from the buildings, ranch hands stopping their work to stare. A bow-legged man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, a young woman with blonde hair and a capable expression, and a shorter Chinese man wearing a flour-dusted apron, his face stern but his eyes curious. Ethan dismounted and walked to the wagon, reaching up to help the children down. Luke came first, practically falling into his arms. Then Catherine with Rose. Emma climbed down on her own, moving like she might need to run at any moment. Michael jumped down without assistance, his pride too wounded to accept help. Benjamin was last, scanning the ranch with tactical assessment, already planning escape routes if necessary. Abigail hesitated, still not quite believing she belonged here. "Come on," Ethan said to her. "You're part of this family. Act like it." The words were rough, but his hand was gentle as he helped her down. The bow-legged man stepped forward, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Boss, you said you were bringing home some children. You didn't say you were bringing home an army." "Hank Morrison, meet your new extended family." Ethan gestured to the children. "8 reasons I'm going to need your help more than ever." Hank studied each child in turn, his expression unreadable. Then he grinned. "Well, this ranch has been too quiet for too long. Welcome, all of you." The blonde woman came forward next. "I'm Clara Morrison, Hank's daughter. I manage the house for Mr. Mackenzie." She looked at Catherine, seeming to sense who'd been carrying the weight. "You must be exhausted. Let's get everyone inside and warm." The Chinese man hadn't moved, but his eyes were sharp, taking in the children's thin frames, their worn clothes, the way they huddled together like they expected to be separated at any moment. "This is Wei Chen," Ethan said, "but everyone calls him Cookie. He runs the kitchen, and trust me, you'll thank God for him every day." Cookie snorted. "Children need food, hot food. Come." It wasn't a suggestion. He turned and walked toward the house, clearly expecting them to follow. The children looked at each other, then at Ethan, who nodded. Slowly, they followed Cookie inside. The warmth hit them like a physical force. The main room was enormous, with a stone fireplace large enough to stand in blazing away at one end. Comfortable furniture arranged in groups, rugs on the wooden floor, lamplight casting everything in gold. And the smell. God, the smell of food cooking, real food, made Catherine's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Cookie led them through to the kitchen, which was even warmer. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and on it sat a pot that bubbled with something that smelled like heaven. "Sit," Cookie commanded, pointing to a long wooden table surrounded by chairs. "All of you sit." They obeyed, arranging themselves on the benches, still pressed together despite having room to spread out. Cookie ladled soup into bowls, thick with meat and vegetables and rich broth. He set a bowl in front of each child, along with a chunk of fresh bread and a glass of milk. "Eat slow," he warned. "Stomachs are cold." "Eat too fast, get sick." Luke took one bite, and his eyes went huge. "This is the best thing I ever tasted." "Manners, Luke," Catherine whispered automatically.
Thank you, sir, Luke corrected quickly. This is the best thing I ever tasted.
Cookie's stern expression softened just slightly. Good boy. Polite. Mother taught you well. Catherine felt tears burn behind her eyes at the mention of their mother. She blinked them back fiercely. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not when they needed her to be strong. But Ethan saw. He always saw. He took the chair at the head of the table, positioning himself so he could see all 8 children. This was the first meal he'd shared with anyone in 6 years, the first time his dining room had held voices and life and the chaotic energy of children. It felt right in a way that terrified him. They ate in silence at first, too hungry for conversation, too scared this might be a dream they'd wake from. But gradually, as warmth and food worked their magic, tension began to ease. Mr. Mackenzie, Abigail ventured quietly, where will we sleep? Upstairs. There are 5 bedrooms besides mine. We'll figure out arrangements. He looked at Clara. Can you help them get settled? Of course. Clara smiled at the children. Finish eating, then we'll get you upstairs. I've prepared beds and laid out night clothes. Tomorrow we'll worry about proper clothes that fit. But tonight, let's just focus on warm and safe. Warm and safe. 2 words the children had almost forgotten the meaning of. After dinner, Clara led them upstairs. The second floor was as spacious as the first, with a long hallway and doors leading to various rooms. Clara opened them one by one, showing the children spaces that seemed impossibly large and clean. Benjamin and Michael, you can share this room, Clara said, opening a door to reveal 2 beds, a dresser, a window with curtains. Catherine, Emma, and Abigail. You 3 can take the room across the hall. Luke and Rose can share the smaller room here. The children stared. Real beds, clean blankets, pillows that looked soft instead of lumpy, windows with glass instead of oiled paper. This can't be real, Michael said flatly. It's real, Clara assured him. This is your home now. Catherine found herself alone with Clara for a moment as the younger children explored their rooms. The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. You've been taking care of them for a long time, haven't you? Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. How old are you? 12. Clara's expression flickered with something that might have been pain. You're 12 years old, and you've been carrying the weight of 7 siblings on your shoulders. That's not right, Catherine. Children shouldn't have to be adults. Someone had to be the mother, Catherine whispered. After Mama died, there was no one else. There's someone else now. Clara took Catherine's hands gently. Listen to me very carefully. Your job is not to be the mother anymore. Your job is to be 12. Do you understand? We're the adults here. Mr. Mackenzie, Cookie, Hank, me. We're going to take care of things. You get to be a child again. The words broke something inside Catherine that had been holding together through sheer force of will. She started crying, great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Clara pulled her close and held her while she wept. 6 years of exhaustion and fear and impossible responsibility pouring out. I'm so tired, Catherine sobbed. I'm so tired of being strong. I know, sweetheart. I know. But you don't have to be strong anymore. We've got you now. In the hallway, Benjamin stood outside the boys' room with Michael, listening to their sister cry through the door. His hands clenched into fists. What if this is a trick? Michael asked quietly. What if he's just being nice until we trust him, and then everything changes? Benjamin didn't have an answer. He'd been asking himself the same question. We have to be careful, he said finally. We can't trust too fast. We have to protect each other. Like always. Like always. But even as he said it, Benjamin felt the weight of doubt. Because what if, just maybe, this wasn't a trick? What if Ethan Mackenzie meant every word he'd said? What if this impossible thing was actually real? He didn't know which scared him more, being betrayed again or learning to hope. Downstairs, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the portrait of Sarah and baby Margaret that hung above his desk. He'd been talking to that portrait for 6 years, holding conversations with ghosts because the living world had become too painful to engage with. Hank found him there, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. He passed one to Ethan and settled into the chair across from him. 8 children, Hank said conversationally. Most men would have started with a dog. I don't do anything halfway. That's the God's honest truth. Hank sipped his drink. They're terrified, you know. All of them. Waiting for this to fall apart. I know. Can you do this, Ethan? Really? 8 damaged children who've learned not to trust. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Ethan looked at his oldest friend. 6 years ago, I wanted to die. You stopped me, remember? I remember. You said Sarah would be ashamed if I gave up, that she'd want me to keep living, keep fighting, keep finding reasons to see another sunrise. Ethan's voice was rough. I didn't believe you. But I was too much of a coward to try again, so I just existed, breathing, but not living. And now? Now I have 8 reasons to wake up in the morning. 8 reasons to be better than I've been. 8 chances to do right by people who've been wronged. He turned to face Hank. I'm not saving them out of charity. I'm saving them because they're saving me. Hank nodded slowly. Then you'd better be prepared for the fight of your life, because those kids are going to test you every single day. And when they do, you can't give up on them. I won't. Promise me, Ethan, because if you take these kids into your heart and then abandon them, it'll break them in ways they can't come back from. Promise me you're in this for the long haul. I promise. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd known each other for decades, who'd survived wars and winters and losses that should have killed them. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in white. Upstairs, 8 children lay in beds that felt too soft, in rooms that felt too warm, in a house that felt too much like a dream. They tried to sleep, but fear kept them awake. Fear that this was temporary. Fear that mourning would bring disappointment. Fear that hoping was the most dangerous thing they could do. At 2 in the morning, Catherine woke to the sound of crying. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emma and Abigail, and crept into the hallway. Luke sat outside his bedroom door, small and alone in his too large nightshirt, tears streaming down his face. Luke, Catherine whispered, kneeling beside him. What's wrong?
I miss Mama,
He sobbed quietly.
I had a dream about her, and when I woke up she wasn't there. And I remembered she's dead, and I'm never going to see her again.
Catherine pulled him close, her own throat tight with grief. I know, baby. I know.
Do you think she can see us? From heaven?
I hope so.
Do you think she knows we're okay now?
Catherine didn't know how to answer that. Were they okay? Or was this just another temporary stop before the next disaster? I think she'd want us to try, Catherine said finally. To give this a chance. To let ourselves hope just a little bit. A shadow fell across them. Catherine looked up to find Ethan standing in his doorway, wearing a nightshirt and looking more human than she'd seen him yet. More vulnerable, somehow. I'm sorry, Catherine said quickly.
We didn't mean to wake you.
You didn't. Ethan walked toward them, moving slowly so as not to startle the boy. Luke, can you tell me what's wrong?
I miss my mama,
Luke whispered. I miss my wife, Ethan replied. He sat down on the floor beside them, big and solid and somehow safe. Her name was Sarah. She died 6 years ago, and I think about her every single day. Luke looked up at him with wet eyes.
Does it stop hurting?
No, but you learn to carry it. The pain becomes part of you, but it doesn't have to be all of you. Ethan hesitated, then asked, Would it help if I sang to you? My mother used to sing to me when I was scared. Luke nodded. Ethan's voice was rough and unpracticed, but the melody was gentle. An old lullaby about a mockingbird and a diamond ring. Catherine found herself leaning against the wall, listening, feeling some of the crushing weight she'd been carrying begin to ease. By the time the song ended, Luke's eyes were heavy. Ethan picked him up with surprising gentleness and carried him back to his room, tucking him in with practiced care that spoke of lost fatherhood. Will you stay? Luke asked sleepily. Just until I fall asleep? Of course. Catherine watched from the doorway as Ethan sat beside Luke's bed, this wealthy, powerful man keeping watch over a traumatized 5-year-old like it was the most important thing in the world. Maybe, she thought. Maybe this time it's different. Maybe this time we're really safe. She went back to her own bed and, for the first time in years, fell asleep without fear gnawing at her edges. Downstairs, the house settled into silence. But it was a different silence than Ethan had lived with for 6 years. Not the silence of loneliness and grief, but the silence of people resting, of a home holding sleeping children, of a family, broken and scared, and piecing itself together one fragile moment at a time. Ethan sat beside Luke until the boy's breathing deepened into sleep. Then he stood, looked at the child one more time, and walked to his own room. He paused in front of Sarah's portrait. I think this might work, he whispered to her. I think I might actually be able to do this. And for the first time in 6 years, he believed it. The first 3 days passed like a careful dance between strangers who didn't know the steps. Benjamin Crawford woke each morning in a bed that was his alone, with sheets that smelled of soap instead of the sour sweat of too many bodies crowded together. He would lie still for several minutes, waiting for the dream to end, waiting for someone to shake him awake and tell him it was time to get back to the orphanage. But the dream didn't end. The bed stayed soft. The room stayed warm. And downstairs, Cookie was already making breakfast for 8 children who had spent too many years going to bed hungry. On the morning of the 3rd day, Benjamin made his decision. He waited until after breakfast, when Ethan was in his study going over ranch accounts. The other children were scattered through the house under Clara's watchful eye. Benjamin slipped into the study and closed the door behind him. Ethan looked up from his ledger, pale blue eyes taking in the boy's tense posture, the fists clenched at his sides. Something wrong? Ethan asked, setting down his pen. Benjamin walked to the shelf where a china vase sat, blue and white porcelain that looked old and expensive. Without hesitation, without taking his eyes off Ethan, he swept his arm across the shelf. The vase tumbled to the floor and shattered into 100 pieces. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Ethan didn't move. He sat perfectly still, watching the boy, waiting. Well? Benjamin's voice shook with anger and fear. Aren't you going to hit me? No. Why not? I just broke something valuable. On purpose. You saw me do it.
Ethan stood slowly and walked around the desk. He knelt and began picking up the larger pieces of porcelain, his movements calm and unhurried. "Was it an accident?" he asked. "No." Benjamin's voice was defiant. "I told you. I did it on purpose." "Why?" The question seemed to throw the boy off balance. He had expected rage, violence, the kind of explosive anger he'd seen from adults his whole life. Not this quiet curiosity. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do," Benjamin said. "I wanted to know if you're like the others." Ethan gathered the broken pieces and stood, carrying them to a wastebasket. He dumped them in with a rattle of porcelain against metal. "The others being men who hit children when they're angry?" Benjamin nodded, his jaw tight.
"I won't ever hit you," Ethan said. He returned to his desk and sat down, his expression unchanged. "Not when you break things, not when you disobey, not ever. But Benjamin, next time you're angry or scared or testing me, use words instead of destroying property. Deal?" The boy stared at him, completely thrown. "You're not even mad?" "I'm disappointed that you felt you needed to do this to get an answer you could have gotten by asking. But mad? No." Ethan picked up his pen again. "The vase can be replaced. Your trust can't be bought. I'd rather have the second than the first." Benjamin stood frozen, his whole body trembling with emotions he didn't know how to process. For 6 years he had been the man of the family, the protector, the one who stayed strong while everything around him crumbled. And now this stranger was offering him something he thought he'd lost forever. Safety. The tears came before he could stop them, hot and shameful on his cheeks. He tried to turn away, but Ethan was already there, kneeling in front of him, solid hands on his shoulders. "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "You've been carrying too much for too long. You're allowed to cry." Benjamin broke. 6 years of grief and terror and desperate responsibility poured out in wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Ethan pulled him close and held him while he cried, one hand steady on the boy's back, saying nothing because there was nothing that words could fix. When the storm finally passed, Benjamin pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve, embarrassed and exhausted. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "For what? For being human?" Ethan stood and returned to his desk. "Go find your siblings. I think Cookie was making apple pie for lunch." Benjamin nodded and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "Mr. Mackenzie? Thank you. For not hitting me." "My name is Ethan," he replied. "And you never have to thank me for treating you like you matter. That's not a favor. That's basic decency." The boy slipped out, closing the door softly behind him. Ethan looked at the broken vase pieces in the wastebasket and thought about all the shattered things in this house that were slowly being made whole again. That same afternoon, Catherine found herself alone in the kitchen with Clara Morrison. The older woman was teaching her how to make bread, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the dough. "You're working it too hard," Clara said gently. "Bread needs a soft touch. Here, like this." She guided Catherine's hands, showing her the gentle folding motion that would make the dough light and airy instead of dense and heavy. Catherine tried to copy the movement, but her hands were shaking. She had been up since before dawn, making beds, sweeping floors, washing dishes, trying to be useful, trying to earn her place in this house before Ethan realized keeping 8 children was too much trouble. "Catherine," Clara's voice was sharp enough to cut through the girl's panicked thoughts. "When did you last sleep more than 4 hours?" "I don't know. I sleep fine. You're exhausted, I can see it in your face." "I have to help." Catherine's voice rose with desperation. "There's so much work, and you can't do it all alone,
And if I'm not useful, then Mr. Mackenzie will send us back and we'll be separated, and I can't let that happen. I have to take care of everyone. I have to— Stop! Clara took the dough from Catherine's hands and set it aside. She turned the girl to face her, hands on her shoulders. Listen to me very carefully. You are 12 years old. 12. You're not supposed to be running a household.
You're supposed to be learning to read and playing with your siblings and being a child. I can't be a child. Tears streamed down Catherine's face. Someone has to be the mother. Mama died, and there's no one else, and the little ones need— The little ones need their sister, not another mother. Clara pulled Catherine into a hug, holding her while she cried. And you need to let the adults be adults. I'm here, Cookie's here, Hank is here, and Ethan is here. We're going to take care of things. Your job is to be 12. Catherine sobbed into Clara's shoulder, her whole body shaking with the weight of years she'd spent trying to be someone she was too young to be. I'm so tired, she whispered. I know, sweetheart. I know. When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back and looked at the exhausted girl. Starting tomorrow, your only job is going to school in town. You'll learn reading and arithmetic and history. After school, you can play with your siblings, or read books, or do whatever 12-year-old girls do. No more cooking, no more cleaning, no more being the mother. Understood? Catherine nodded, not quite believing it could be that simple. But the next morning, Clara woke her at 7 instead of 5, helped her into a clean dress, and packed her a lunch in a tin pail. Then Hank drove her into Cheyenne in the ranch wagon and walked her to the schoolhouse door. For the first time in 6 years, Catherine Crawford got to be a child again. Michael was harder. The 10-year-old boy was a coiled spring of rage and pain, lashing out at anyone who came too close. On the 4th day, he shoved Luke hard enough that the younger boy fell and scraped his hands bloody on the wooden porch. Ethan saw it through the window. He was outside before Luke's crying had fully registered, scooping Michael up by the arm and walking him away from the house to the barn. Michael went rigid, expecting the beating he knew was coming. He'd been hit before for less. He set his jaw and prepared to take it without crying. But Ethan didn't hit him. Instead, he set the boy down on a hay bale and sat beside him, close but not touching. Tell me what happened. Michael said nothing, staring at the ground. Luke is half your size and 5 years younger. Why did you push him? Still nothing. Michael, I need to understand. Help me understand. Because I hate him! The words exploded out of the boy like they'd been building pressure for months. I hate all of them. I hate this place. I hate you. No, you don't. Yes, I do. You're angry, Ethan said calmly. Anger is different from hate. What do you know about it? Michael's voice cracked. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. Michael's hands clenched into fists. His whole body was shaking. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I saw Uncle Frank die. The horse kicked him right in the head, and there was blood everywhere, and he just stopped moving. He was there, and then he wasn't. And I couldn't do anything. I just stood there and watched him die. The dam broke. Words poured out in a torrent. And before that, Mama died, having Rose, and I heard her screaming for hours before she went quiet. And before that, Papa coughed up blood for 3 months before the consumption took him. And everyone leaves. Everyone dies. Everyone goes away. And I can't stop it. And I can't fix it. and I'm so tired of being scared all the time." He was crying now, harsh sobs that sounded like they were being ripped from his chest. "I don't hate Luke. I don't hate anyone. I'm just so angry and scared, and I don't know what to do with it, so I push people away before they can leave me first." Ethan let him cry. When the worst of it had passed, he spoke quietly. "You're not broken, Michael. You're hurt. There's a difference." The boy looked up, his face blotchy and wet.
Broken things get thrown away, Ethan continued. Hurt things get time to heal. You've seen terrible things. You've lost people you loved. That's not your fault, and it doesn't make you defective. It makes you someone who survived more than any 10-year-old should have to. He put a hand on Michael's shoulder, firm and steady. I'm going to help you learn how to be angry without hurting people, how to be scared without pushing everyone away. But Michael, you have to trust me enough to try. Can you do that? The boy nodded slowly, not quite believing, but wanting desperately to try. Good. Now let's go apologize to Luke and clean up his hands. They walked back to the house together. Michael mumbled an apology to his younger brother and helped Clara bandage the scraped palms. Luke, with the easy forgiveness of young children, hugged Michael and ran off to play.
That night, for the first time since Uncle Frank died, Michael slept through without nightmares. Emma was the mystery. The 7-year-old girl had not spoken since the day Frank Crawford's horse kicked him. She had been standing 3 feet away when it happened, close enough to be splattered with his blood, close enough to see the light go out of his eyes. The doctor said there was nothing physically wrong with her voice. This was selective mutism born from trauma, and only time would tell if she would speak again. Ethan didn't push. He simply sat with her sometimes, in comfortable silence, doing ranch paperwork while she drew pictures on scraps of paper with the colored pencils Clara had given her. On the 5th day, he found her in the stable, sitting in the straw next to a pregnant mare. She was humming, so quietly he almost missed it, a lullaby her mother used to sing. When she realized he was there, she stopped abruptly and looked terrified. "Don't stop on my account," Ethan said, settling onto a hay bale several feet away, giving her space. "You have a beautiful voice." Emma shook her head violently and pressed her lips together. "You don't have to talk if you're not ready," he told her. "I'll wait. A year, 10 years, however long it takes. But Emma, when you are ready, I hope you'll know that your voice matters. What you have to say matters. And I'll be here to listen." The girl studied him with solemn brown eyes, judging, weighing, deciding. Finally, she picked up a piece of charcoal from the stable floor and wrote on the wooden wall in careful letters. "Why are you being nice to us?" Ethan read the words and considered his answer carefully. "Because someone should have been nice to you all along," he said, "and because I know what it's like to lose everything. 6 years ago, my wife Sarah died having our baby. The baby died too, a little girl we were going to name Margaret. I spent 6 years wishing I'd died with them. Then I saw your picture in the newspaper, and I realized I'd been given a second chance. Not to replace what I lost, but to build something new." Emma wrote again. "Do you still miss them?" "Every day." "Does it stop hurting?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but you learn to carry it, and having people to care about makes the weight lighter." Emma nodded slowly, then went back to humming to the horse. Ethan stayed with her until dinner, not talking, just present. Sometimes presence was enough. But it was Abigail Harper who surprised him most. The 9-year-old with the scarred face kept herself apart from the others, eating last at meals, sleeping in the corner of the room she shared with Catherine and Emma, never quite believing she had the same rights as the Crawford children. On the 6th day,
Ethan found her in the barn, curled up in an empty stall, crying as quietly as she could manage. "Abigail." He kept his voice gentle.
"What's wrong?" She tried to hide her tears, scrubbing at her face with her sleeve.
"Nothing, sir. I'm sorry. I'll go back to the house."
"You're not in trouble. I just want to know why you're crying."
"I don't belong here."
The words came out in a rush.
"The Crawfords are family, real family. I'm just the extra one you bought because you felt sorry for me. Sooner or later, you're going to realize keeping me was a mistake."
Ethan sat down in the straw beside her, close enough to talk but far enough to not crowd her. "Do you know why I chose you that day at the orphanage?" Abigail touched her scarred cheek.
"Because you pitied me."
"No. Because when I looked at you, I saw strength. You survived a fire that killed your parents. You survived 2 years in that place where Silas Thornton told you every day that you were worthless. And you were still standing, still hoping. That's not weakness, Abigail. That's power."
"But I'm ugly."
Her voice broke on the word. "Nobody wants ugly children." "You're beautiful," Ethan said firmly. "And anyone who can't see that is blind. That scar on your face, it's proof that you're a survivor. It's proof that you're strong enough to keep living when everything was taken from you. There's nothing ugly about strength." Abigail stared at him, tears streaming down both cheeks now, the scarred one and the unmarked one.
"Why are you so nice to me?"
she whispered. "Because you deserve kindness. Every child does. No exceptions." She broke then, crying in great heaving sobs, all the pain and rejection and loneliness of 2 years pouring out. Ethan pulled her close and let her cry, his large hand gentle on her back. "You belong here," he told her. "Not because I feel sorry for you. Because I chose you. And I don't regret it. Not for a second." When she finally cried herself out, she looked up at him with red, swollen eyes.
"Can I ask you something?"
"Anything." "If the judge had said no at the hearing, if he tried to take us back, what would you have done?" Ethan smiled, a rare expression that softened his hard features. "I would have fought, and I would have won, because I don't lose when something matters." That night, Abigail Harper came down to dinner and sat between Catherine and Emma instead of at the end of the table. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. The 6th day ended with all 8 children in bed, the house quiet except for the wind outside and the crackle of the fire in Ethan's study. Hank Morrison found him there, staring into the flames. "They're settling in," Hank observed, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from the decanter on the sideboard. "Are they? Or are they just waiting for the other shoe to drop?" "Bit of both, I'd wager." Hank settled into the chair across from Ethan. "Benjamin still doesn't trust you. Might not for a while yet." "I know. And Michael's got a temper that's going to take years to manage properly." "I know that too." "And Emma might never speak again." "She will," Ethan said with quiet certainty. "When she's ready." Hank took a sip of his whiskey, studying his friend. "You're doing good here, Ethan. Better than I thought possible." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never does. But those kids are eating regular, sleeping safe, learning they don't have to fight for every scrap of kindness. That's more than they had a week ago." Ethan nodded, still staring into the fire. "Sarah would have loved them," he said quietly. "Sarah would have loved that you're finally living again, instead of haunting that portrait on the wall." "I still talk to her sometimes." "I know. But Ethan, she's been gone 6 years. Those children upstairs are here now.
They need you present, not stuck in the past. I'm trying. I know you are. Hank stood, set down his glass. Get some sleep.
Tomorrow's another day of earning their trust. After Hank left, Ethan climbed the stairs to check on the children one last time, a habit he'd fallen into over the past week. He opened doors quietly, looking in on sleeping forms. Benjamin slept on his side, one arm hanging off the bed. Michael was curled into a tight ball, even in sleep, protecting himself. Catherine had Rose tucked against her, the 3-year-old's thumb in her mouth. Emma slept with her eyes moving behind closed lids, dreaming of something he hoped was peaceful. Luke was sprawled across his bed like a starfish, and Abigail, in the corner of her room, had finally moved to sleep in the bed instead of on the floor. 8 children, 8 lives he was responsible for. 8 chances to do right by people who'd been wronged by the world. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Ethan closed the last door and headed to his own room. But before he could sleep, he paused at his desk. In the drawer was a letter that had arrived that afternoon. He'd hidden it from the children, not wanting to frighten them, but now, alone in the quiet house, he pulled it out and read it again. The territorial court seal was unmistakable. Judge Blackwood had filed a petition to overturn the adoption. A hearing was scheduled for December 22nd, 7 days from now. The children would have to testify. They would have to stand in front of a courtroom full of strangers and explain why they wanted to stay. And if the court ruled against them, they would be torn apart, sent to different families. The family they'd just started to build, shattered before it had a chance to take root. Ethan looked at the portrait of Sarah and baby Margaret hanging on his wall. I won't let them take the children, he said quietly. I don't care what I have to do. I won't break my promise. He folded the letter and locked it back in the drawer. Tomorrow he would tell the children. Tomorrow they would face this new threat together. But tonight, he would let them sleep in peace, believing for just a few more hours that they were finally safe. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the ranch in silence. The letter arrived on the morning of the 7th day. Hank Morrison brought it in with the morning mail, his weathered face tight with concern. He found Ethan in the stable, teaching Benjamin the proper way to saddle a horse. The boy's hands were clumsy but willing, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, there was something like peace in his eyes. Ethan. Hank's voice cut through the quiet morning. We have a problem. Ethan took the envelope, noting the official seal of the Wyoming Territorial Court. His jaw tightened as he read, each word landing like a physical blow. Benjamin watched the color drain from Ethan's face. What is it? Judge Blackwood is contesting the adoption. Ethan's voice was carefully controlled, but fury burned beneath the surface. He's filed a petition to have it overturned, and all 8 of you returned to state custody. The boy went pale. Can he do that? He's trying. Ethan folded the letter with deliberate precision. There's a hearing scheduled for December 22nd, 7 days from now. What happens if he wins? Ethan met Benjamin's eyes, and the boy saw something there that was both terrifying and reassuring. Cold rage, yes, but also absolute determination. He won't win. But what if he does? What if the court says you can't keep us? Then I'll find another way. Ethan's voice was iron. I don't break promises, Benjamin. I told you that you were safe here. I meant it. But Benjamin had learned not to trust promises. He had watched his father promise his mother he'd beat the consumption. He had watched his uncle promise to take care of them forever. Promises meant nothing when the world decided to take everything away. We should prepare the children, Hank said quietly. They need to know what's coming. That night, Ethan gathered all 8 children in the dining room. They sat around the long table, sensing the gravity of the moment, their faces reflecting varying degrees of fear and confusion. "Judge Blackwood wants to separate you," Ethan said, believing in honesty even when it hurt. "He's claiming that a single man can't properly care for 8 children. There will be another hearing in 7 days to decide if you stay here or go back into state custody." The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine's arms tightened around Rose. Michael's face went blank, that dangerous emptiness that preceded his rages. Luke started to cry, quiet tears rolling down his cheeks. Abigail looked like she might be sick. "We'll be sent to different families." Benjamin's voice was hollow. "That's what they do. Split up siblings so they're easier to place. That's not going to happen." "You can't promise that." Benjamin slammed his hand on the table. "You can't control what a judge decides. You're just one man." "I'm one very rich man, with very good lawyers," Ethan replied. "And I have witnesses who will testify that you're thriving here. Dr. Warren will confirm you're all healthier than when you arrived. Reverend Whitfield will speak to my character. Hank has known me for 20 years and will swear I'm fit to raise children." "But you're not married." Catherine's voice was small. "The law favors families with 2 parents. Everyone knows that." "Then the law needs to change." "Laws don't change in 7 days," Benjamin shot back. Ethan leaned forward, his pale blue eyes intense. "Listen to me, all of you. I have fought bigger battles than this. I have survived things that should have killed me. And I have never, not once, given up on something that mattered. You matter. This family matters. And I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe." "Why?" The question came from Abigail, so quiet they almost missed it. "Why do we matter so much to you? You barely know us." "Because 7 days ago I was a dead man walking through an empty house, talking to ghosts. And now I have 8 reasons to wake up in the morning. 8 reasons to fight. 8 reasons to live. You didn't just get a family when that judge approved the adoption. I did too." Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to bed." "Michael, I can't do this again." The boy's voice cracked. "I can't hope and then have it taken away. It hurts too much." He ran from the room. After a moment, Benjamin followed. Ethan found them later in the bedroom they shared. Michael was curled on his bed, face to the wall. Benjamin sat on his own bed, staring at nothing. "I know you're scared," Ethan said from the doorway. "You don't know anything." Michael's voice was muffled against his pillow. "I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to think you'll never feel whole again. And I know that giving up is easier than fighting." "Then why fight?" Benjamin asked bitterly. "Why not just let them take us now and save everyone the pain of hoping?" Ethan stepped into the room and sat on the floor between their beds, his back against the wall. 6 years ago, when Sarah died, I wanted to die too. I stood at her grave and I thought about eating my gun, just ending it because the pain was too much to carry. Both boys went still, listening despite themselves. Hank found me in the barn that night, took my pistol away, told me that Sarah would be ashamed if I gave up, that she'd want me to keep living, keep fighting, keep finding reasons to see another sunrise. Ethan's voice was rough with memory. I didn't believe him. But I was too much of a coward to try again, so I just existed, breathing but not living. For 6 years. "What changed?" Benjamin asked. "I saw your picture in the newspaper. 8 pairs of eyes staring out at me. And I realized I'd been given a chance to build something new, not to replace what I lost, but to create something that mattered. You changed everything. Michael rolled over to look at him. What if it's not enough? What if the judge takes us anyway? Then we appeal. And if we lose the appeal, we find another way. There's always another way. The question is whether you're willing to fight for it. I'm tired of fighting, Michael whispered. I know, but you don't have to fight alone anymore. That's what family means. The next morning brought Victoria Sterling. She arrived in a black carriage pulled by matched grays, dressed in furs that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her niece Annabelle accompanied her, a pretty blonde girl of 24 who looked acutely uncomfortable. Clara showed them into the parlor, where Ethan was reviewing legal documents with his attorney. He looked up as Victoria swept in, her face set in lines of aristocratic disapproval. Victoria, to what do I owe the displeasure? Don't be crude, Ethan. I've come to help you avoid making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I see is you on my property uninvited. Victoria settled onto the sofa as if she owned it. I've heard about Judge Blackwood's petition. The whole town is talking about it. This ridiculous experiment of yours with 8 orphans. They're not an experiment. They're children. They're a liability. Victoria's voice was cold. You're a wealthy, prominent man. Do you have any idea how this looks? A bachelor adopting 8 children at once? People are starting to talk. Let them talk. Be reasonable. You want a family? Marry Annabelle. She's young, healthy, comes from good stock. She'll give you legitimate heirs, not these damaged cast-offs. Ethan stood, his full height making the room feel suddenly smaller. Get out of my house. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to marry your niece to my money. You don't care about my happiness or hers. You care about merging our properties and increasing your social standing. He walked to the door and opened it. Leave. Now, before I have you thrown out. Victoria stood, her face mottled with rage. I have influence with Judge Blackwood. I can make sure you lose that hearing. Try it. But know this, Victoria. If you interfere with my family, I will destroy you. Socially, financially, completely. Every dirty secret you think is buried will come to light. Every questionable business deal. Every skeleton in your pristine closet. Are we clear? Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, she swept from the room, dragging Annabelle behind her. That was unwise, his attorney said quietly. You just made a powerful enemy. I already had her as an enemy. Now she knows what will happen if she acts on it. But Victoria Sterling was the least of his problems. That afternoon, the sky turned ugly. Dark clouds rolled in from the mountains, heavy with snow. The temperature plummeted. By evening, the first flakes were falling, and by midnight, a full blizzard had descended on Wyoming. Luke woke, coughing. At first, Catherine thought it was just the dry air. She gave him water and tucked him back into bed. But by morning, the cough had worsened. By noon, he had a fever. It's just a cold, Catherine told herself, bathing his forehead with cool cloths. Children get colds. But by evening, Luke was barely conscious, his small body burning with fever, his breath coming in shallow, labored gasps. Dr. Warren was 30 miles away in Cheyenne, unreachable through the storm that had turned into a howling white nightmare. The ranch was cut off, isolated by snowdrifts that were already 6 feet deep and climbing. Ethan stood at Luke's bedside, watching the boy struggle to breathe, and felt the ghosts of 6 years ago rise up to choke him. Sarah laboring for 20 hours before the light went out of her eyes. Baby Margaret, blue and still, never taking a single breath. He couldn't lose another child. Not like this. Not when he'd promised them safety. "I'm going for the doctor," he said. Hank grabbed his arm. "You can't. The storm is too strong. You won't make it 5 miles. If I don't go, Luke dies. If you go, you both might die. Then that's a risk I have to take." Catherine stood in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Please don't go. We already lost everyone else. We can't lose you too." Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "I lost my daughter in this same room, in this same bed, because I couldn't save her. I won't lose Luke. I won't lose any of you. I'm coming back. I promise." "People break promises," she whispered. "I don't." He stood and turned to Hank. "Keep him cool. Keep him breathing. I'll be back with Dr. Warren by dawn." "Ethan." But he was already gone, pulling on his heavy coat, wrapping a scarf around his face, heading to the stable where his strongest horse waited. The children gathered in Luke's room after he left. Catherine, Benjamin, Michael, Emma, Abigail, even little Rose, who didn't understand what was happening but knew something was terribly wrong. They knelt around Luke's bed, 8 children who had lost too much already, praying to a God who hadn't answered their prayers in a very long time. "Please don't take him," Catherine whispered. "We can't lose anyone else. Please." Michael, who had spent weeks fighting his emotions, broke down crying. "I'm sorry I pushed him. I'm sorry I was mean. Please don't let him die because I was angry." Benjamin held his brother, both of them shaking with fear and grief. And Emma, who had not spoken in 6 months, who had been silent since the day she watched her uncle die, opened her mouth and let words fall out like broken glass. "Luke." Her voice was rusty, uncertain, but unmistakably there. "You have to live. Mr. Mackenzie is coming to save you. Don't leave before he gets back. Please, don't leave." Everyone froze. Emma had spoken. Catherine grabbed her sister, pulling her close. "Emma, oh Emma." But Emma kept talking to Luke, her words tumbling over each other. "You promised you'd count all the horses. You promised we'd learn to ride together. You can't break promises. That's not fair." Luke's eyelids flickered but didn't open. The storm raged outside, shaking the windows, howling like a living thing. Somewhere in that white chaos, Ethan Mackenzie was riding through hell to save a 5-year-old boy he'd known for 7 days. 3 hours passed like centuries. Cookie brought broth that Luke couldn't swallow. Clara brought more cool cloths. Hank paced the hallway, his weathered face creased with worry. And the children waited, hoping against hope that the man who had promised to protect them would keep his word. Just before dawn, they heard it. The sound of hooves on the drive, voices shouting, the front door crashing open. Ethan burst into the room, half frozen, bleeding from a cut on his forehead where he'd been thrown from his horse. Behind him came Dr. Warren, carrying his medical bag, snow covering both men from head to foot. "I told you I'd come back," Ethan said, his words slurred with cold and exhaustion. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed. Dr. Warren worked on Luke while Clara tended to Ethan's injuries. A gash across his temple that needed stitches, frostbite on 3 fingers, a badly sprained ankle from when his horse had gone down in a snowdrift. "You damned fool," Dr. Warren muttered as he examined Luke. "You could have died out there." "But I didn't. Pure luck. I don't believe in luck. I believe in necessity. Luke needed me, so I came. And if you'd frozen to death, then someone else would have raised these children. But they'd know I tried. They'd know I didn't abandon them." Dr. Warren administered medicine, opened Luke's airways, worked with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd seen too much death and refused to accept another. After an hour, Luke's fever began to drop. His breathing eased. Color returned to his cheeks.
"Pneumonia," Dr. Warren confirmed. "But you got to me in time. Another few hours and there'd have been nothing I could do."
Ethan was sitting in a chair by the bed, refusing to be moved despite his injuries. Luke's small hand was clasped in his larger one. When Luke finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Ethan's face, battered and bloodied and smiling.
"Papa,"
Luke whispered. The word just came, natural as breathing.
"You came back."
Ethan's vision blurred. 6 years of holding back tears. 6 years of being strong. 6 years of refusing to feel. All of it shattered in one moment. "I'll always come back," he said, his voice breaking. "I promise you, I'll always come back." Luke smiled, weak but real, and fell back into healing sleep. The other children crowded into the room, needing to see for themselves that both Luke and Ethan were alive. Benjamin touched Ethan's shoulder, awkward but genuine. Catherine hugged him carefully, avoiding his injuries. Michael stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. And Emma spoke again, her voice growing stronger.
"You kept your promise."
"I told you I would."
"People don't keep promises to us."
Ethan looked at each child in turn, these 8 souls he'd sworn to protect. "I'm not other people, and you're going to learn that about me." As dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, 8 children and 1 battered man sat together in a room that had once held death and now held something else entirely. Hope, and the unshakable knowledge that some promises were worth dying for. December 22nd, 1885, dawned cold and clear over Cheyenne. The courthouse stood at the center of town, an imposing structure of Wyoming sandstone that represented justice, or at least the territory's best approximation of it. By 9 in the morning, every seat in the courtroom was filled. People had come from 50 miles around to witness what the newspapers were calling the trial of the decade. One man against the system. 8 orphans hanging in the balance. Ethan Mackenzie sat at the defendant's table, his injuries from the blizzard ride still visible. The gash on his forehead had been stitched, but remained angry and red. His right hand was bandaged where frostbite had blackened 3 fingers. He moved stiffly, favoring his sprained ankle. But his eyes were clear and cold as winter ice. Behind him, in the front row of the gallery, sat 8 children. They wore their best clothes, which Clara had pressed that morning with shaking hands. Benjamin sat at one end, his jaw set hard. Catherine held Rose on her lap, the 3-year-old mercifully quiet. Michael sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Emma pressed close to Abigail, both girls pale with fear. Luke, still recovering from pneumonia, leaned against Benjamin's shoulder. In the rows behind them sat Hank Morrison and Clara. Cookie had come, uncomfortable in a suit. Dr. Warren sat ready to testify. Reverend Whitfield waited with his Bible and his convictions. On the other side of the courtroom, Judge Cornelius Blackwood sat with his attorney, a sharp-faced man named Aldrich, who specialized in territorial law. Beside them, Silas Thornton wore a smug expression that made Benjamin want to cross the room and wipe it off his face with violence. Victoria Sterling occupied a prominent seat in the 3rd row, her fur coat draped across her shoulders like a monument to wealth. She caught Ethan's eye and smiled, cold and victorious. The bailiff stood. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Thaddeus Morrison presiding." Everyone stood as the judge entered. He was a different man than Blackwood, older, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily fooled. He had been brought in from the territorial capital specifically because Judge Blackwood was the defendant in all but name. "Be seated." Judge Morrison's voice carried authority without needing volume.
He surveyed the packed courtroom, his gaze lingering on the 8 children. Something flickered in his expression, but he gave nothing away.
This is a hearing to determine the fitness of Ethan Cole Mackenzie to serve as legal guardian to 8 minor children currently under his provisional custody. Mr. Aldrich, you may present your opening statement.
Aldrich stood, smoothing his jacket. He was a performer, Ethan realized, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Your Honor, this case is simple. Wyoming law is clear about adoption requirements. Preference is given to married couples who can provide both maternal and paternal influence. Mr. Mackenzie is a bachelor. He has no wife to provide the gentle guidance that children, especially girls, require. He lives on an isolated ranch 30 miles from town, limiting the children's access to proper schooling and society. Aldrich paced, warming to his theme. Furthermore, 8 children is an unprecedented number for any single person to adopt.
The court must consider whether one man, regardless of his financial resources, can adequately supervise, educate, and raise 8 children ranging in age from 3 to 14. The potential for neglect is enormous. These children have already suffered significant trauma. They deserve stability, proper supervision, and the structure that only a traditional family can provide. He paused, letting his words sink in. Judge Blackwood's petition is not motivated by spite or financial interest. It is motivated by genuine concern for these children's welfare. The original adoption approval was granted hastily, under pressure, without proper consideration of Mr. Mackenzie's suitability as a guardian. We ask the court to correct that error and return these children to state custody, where they can be properly placed with appropriate families. Aldrich sat down, satisfied. Judge Morrison looked at Ethan. Mr. Mackenzie, you're representing yourself? I am, Your Honor. Do you wish to make an opening statement? Ethan stood, ignoring the pain in his ankle. He didn't move from behind the table. He didn't need theatrics. Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer. I can't quote statutes or precedents. I can only tell you what I know. I know that 8 children came into my life 2 weeks ago. They were hungry, scared, and broken by a system that saw them as burdens instead of blessings. I know that in 2 weeks, they've gained weight, started healing, and begun to trust again. And I know that if this court takes them away from me, it will destroy every bit of progress they've made. He paused, his pale eyes sweeping the courtroom. The law favors married couples, I understand that. But the law also exists to protect children, not to sacrifice them on the altar of tradition. These 8 deserve a chance. I'm asking the court to give them that chance. He sat down. It was brief, almost blunt, but something in his words hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Aldrich, call your first witness. Silas Thornton took the stand, his hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. Ethan watched him and thought about all the ways he wanted to make the man suffer. Mr. Thornton, Aldrich began. You served as the children's guardian at the Cheyenne orphanage. Can you describe their behavior during that time? Troubled, all of them. Thornton's voice dripped with false concern. The oldest boy, Benjamin, was defiant and aggressive. Michael had violent tendencies, attacking other children without provocation. Emma refused to speak, a clear sign of deep psychological damage. They were difficult children from difficult circumstances. And in your professional opinion, what kind of environment do they require? Structure, discipline, preferably separation so their negative influences on each other can be minimized. The Crawford children have spent too long as a unit, enabling each other's worst behaviors. They need to be in different homes, where they can learn proper conduct. Benjamin's hands clenched so hard his knuckles went white. Catherine put a restraining hand on his arm.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton.
Aldrich returned to his seat. Judge Morrison looked at Ethan. Cross-examination? Ethan stood and limped to the witness box. He didn't ask permission to approach. He simply walked until he stood 3 feet from Silas Thornton, close enough that the man had to crane his neck to look up at him. You said Michael has violent tendencies. Can you give a specific example? Thornton shifted uncomfortably. He struck another boy in the orphanage. When? I don't recall the exact date. Was it before or after he watched his uncle die violently in front of him?
I believe after, but...
So a 10-year-old boy who witnessed traumatic death acted out, and your solution was to label him defective rather than get him help?
That's not what I...
You said Emma's silence is a sign of psychological damage. Did you ever have her examined by a doctor?
We don't have funds for...
You have funds to run the orphanage. You have funds to pay your own salary, but no funds for a traumatized 7-year-old who watched a man die. Ethan's voice was quiet, deadly. Or was she more valuable silent, easier to control? Objection! Aldrich was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm not counsel, Ethan said. I'm a father protecting his children from a man who beat them. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. Order! Mr. Mackenzie, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? I have this. Ethan pulled back his sleeve, revealing the bandages on his hand. 5 days ago, I rode 30 miles through a blizzard to save Luke Crawford's life. I nearly died doing it. I have frostbite and a concussion and a sprained ankle. And you know what Luke said when he woke up? He said, "Papa, you came back." Because he'd never had an adult in his life who kept a promise. He turned back to Thornton. You want to talk about fitness? About who should raise these children? Luke was terrified of you. They all were. Because you taught them that adults hit when they're angry and lie when it's convenient. I'm teaching them the opposite. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Aldrich protested. But Judge Morrison was watching Ethan with new interest. Mr. Mackenzie, return to your table. Mr. Aldrich, call your next witness. Victoria Sterling took the stand next. Elegant in her furs, her voice cultured and concerned. I've known Mr. Mackenzie for 15 years, she said in response to Aldrich's questions. Since his wife Sarah died, he's been a broken man, isolated, grieving, unable to move past his loss. He lives alone in that enormous house, talking to portraits of his dead wife. It's tragic, truly. But it also makes him unsuitable to raise children who need emotional stability. And these sudden adoptions? Aldrich prompted. A desperate attempt to fill the void his wife left. But children aren't replacement parts. They're human beings who need more than money and good intentions. They need parents who are emotionally whole. Mr. Mackenzie is still shattered. Ethan didn't cross-examine her. He simply stared at her until she looked away, uncomfortable under that pale, unblinking gaze. Dr. Warren, would you take the stand, please? The doctor settled into the witness chair, his medical bag at his feet out of habit. Dr. Warren, you examined all 8 children. Can you describe their condition? When I first saw them at the orphanage, they showed signs of chronic malnutrition, poor hygiene, and psychological distress. Luke had untreated respiratory issues. Michael had healed fractures that were never properly set. Emma displayed symptoms of severe trauma. Ethan's hands tightened on the table. And when you examined them 2 days ago? Remarkable improvement. All 8 have gained weight. Their color is better. Luke's respiratory issues have been treated. More importantly, they smile now. They laugh. They behave like children instead of prisoners. In your medical opinion, are they better off with Mr. Mackenzie than they were in state custody? Unquestionably. I've been practicing medicine for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of orphans placed in hundreds of homes. These 8 children are thriving under Mr. Mackenzie's care in a way I've rarely witnessed. Even though he's unmarried? A child doesn't need 2 parents. A child needs love, safety, food, and someone who will fight for them. Mr. Mackenzie provides all of that. Aldrich tried to shake Dr. Warren's testimony on cross-examination, but the doctor was immovable. Facts were facts. The children were healthier, happier, and safer than they'd been in months. Reverend Whitfield testified next, speaking to Ethan's character with the conviction of a man who believed every word he said. Ethan Mackenzie is the finest man I know. When his wife died, he could have become bitter and cruel. Instead, he became quiet and sad. And when he saw children who needed help, he didn't hesitate. He didn't calculate the cost or consider his reputation. He simply acted. That's the mark of true goodness. Hank Morrison's testimony was shorter, but equally powerful. I've known Ethan 20 years. I watched him build that ranch from nothing. I watched him love his wife with everything he had. I watched him nearly die of grief when she passed, and I've watched him come back to life these past 2 weeks. Because 8 children gave him a reason to keep breathing. You want to know if he's fit to be their father? He already is their father. Any fool can see it. By midday, the testimony was complete. The evidence was presented, and Judge Morrison called a recess to consider his decision. The children fled the courtroom, needing air, needing space. Ethan followed them outside where snow still covered the ground from the blizzard. Benjamin confronted him on the courthouse steps. "They're going to take us away." The boy's voice shook. "I can see it in that judge's face. The law says we need 2 parents and you're only 1. The judge hasn't decided yet." "He will." Benjamin's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "And we'll go back to that place or worse. We'll be separated, and I won't be able to protect them, and it's all going to fall apart again." "Benjamin, I'm tired of losing people." The dam broke. "I'm tired of watching everyone I love get taken away. First Papa, then Mama, then Uncle Frank, and now you. Why does God keep doing this to us? What did we do to deserve this?" Ethan pulled the boy into his arms, holding him while he sobbed. The other children gathered close, all of them crying now, all of them terrified of what was coming. "Listen to me," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you are my children. Not by blood, not by law if the judge rules against us, but by choice. And no one can take that away. Do you understand? Even if we lose today, I will keep fighting. I will appeal to every court in the territory. I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe." "But what if you can't?" Catherine whispered. "Then I'll make sure you know that I tried, that I didn't give up, that you mattered enough to fight for." They stood together on the courthouse steps, 9 people bound by something stronger than law or blood. They stood together and waited for the world to tell them whether love was enough. Inside, Judge Morrison sat alone in his chambers, reading testimonies, reviewing evidence, weighing the law against the reality in front of him. 8 children who had been broken and were now healing. 1 man who had been dead and was now alive. And a system that said it couldn't be enough because tradition mattered more than truth. He thought about his own daughter, lost to illness when she was 6.
He thought about how he would have given anything, broken any law, defied any precedent to save her. And he made his decision. The bailiff called them back at 2 o'clock. The courtroom filled again, silent and tense. Ethan and the children took their places. 8 young faces, trying to be brave, trying not to hope too hard. Judge Morrison entered and sat. He didn't look at his notes. He looked directly at the children. "I've heard compelling testimony on both sides," he began.
The law is clear about adoption preferences. Married couples are favored. Single individuals face higher scrutiny. And 8 children is an unprecedented number for any adoption. Benjamin closed his eyes. Catherine's arms tightened around Rose. But the law also exists to serve children, not tradition. And I've heard something today that can't be ignored. The judge looked at Ethan. Dr. Warren testified that these children are thriving under your care. Reverend Whitfield testified to your character. Mr. Morrison testified to your commitment. But more importantly, I've watched these children today. I've seen how they look at you, how they trust you, how they call you Papa. Luke's hand found Ethan's under the table. The question isn't whether you fit the traditional model of a parent. The question is whether these specific children are better off with you than in any alternative placement. And the answer, based on evidence presented, is yes. The courtroom held its breath. Petition to overturn the adoption is denied. Ethan Cole McKenzie will retain full legal custody of all 8 children. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the practices at the Cheyenne Orphanage. Judge Blackwood, you're suspended pending the results of that investigation. The gavel came down. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the courtroom exploded. Benjamin grabbed Ethan, hugging him hard. Catherine burst into tears of relief. Michael actually smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. Emma spoke again, clear and strong. "We can stay. We get to stay." Abigail wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist, her scarred face pressed against his chest, sobbing with joy. Luke looked up at Ethan with those enormous blue eyes and said the words that broke the last of Ethan's careful control. "I love you, Papa." And Ethan McKenzie, who hadn't cried in 6 years, who had held himself together through loss and grief and more pain than any man should bear, finally let the tears come. He gathered all 8 children close, this family he'd chosen and who had chosen him back, and he wept. Across the courtroom, Judge Blackwood sat frozen, his empire crumbling. Silas Thornton had already fled. Victoria Sterling stared at Ethan with pure hatred, but there was nothing she could do. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had finally arrived. That evening, the McKenzie family rode home through snow that sparkled in the sunset. 8 children and 1 man, legal now, official, unbreakable. As the ranch came into view, Benjamin spoke quietly from the wagon bed. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Ethan looked back at him, at all of them, these 8 souls who had saved his life by letting him save theirs. "Thank you for teaching me how to live again." And in that moment, on a December evening in 1885, broken things became whole, and a family was born. Christmas morning, 1885, dawned bright and cold over the McKenzie ranch. Ethan woke to the sound of children's laughter, a sound his house hadn't known in 6 years. He lay in bed for a moment, letting it wash over him, still not quite believing it was real. 3 days since the trial. 3 days of being a legal father to 8 souls who had chosen to call him Papa. When he came downstairs, he found chaos. Good chaos, the kind that comes from children who feel safe enough to be loud. Luke and Michael were engaged in some kind of elaborate game involving toy soldiers Cookie had carved from wood scraps. Catherine and Emma were helping Clara decorate the tree they'd cut down yesterday, stringing popcorn and paper chains. Rose toddled between groups, getting underfoot and being universally adored for it. Benjamin stood by the window, watching snow fall, his face peaceful in a way Ethan had never seen before. And Abigail sat in the corner with a book, reading aloud to herself, no longer hiding her scarred face in shadow. This was what a family looked like.
Merry Christmas, Papa!
Luke spotted him first and launched himself across the room. Ethan caught him, swinging him up despite his still healing ankle. Merry Christmas, son. The word felt natural now. Son, daughter, his children, his family. They gathered for breakfast around the long table that had sat mostly empty for 6 years. Cookie had outdone himself with pancakes and bacon and fresh bread. The children ate with the enthusiasm of people who no longer feared the next meal might not come. After breakfast, there were gifts. Simple things. New boots for Benjamin because he was growing too fast for his old ones. A set of drawing pencils for Emma, who had discovered a talent for art. Books for Catherine, who devoured knowledge like other children devoured candy. A wooden horse for Luke that Hank had carved with surprising skill. Warm coats for everyone, because Wyoming winters were unforgiving. But the best gift was intangible. The gift of belonging. Of knowing that tomorrow and the day after and all the days that followed, they would wake up in this house, with this family. Later, when the excitement had died down and the younger children were napping, Ethan found himself in front of Sarah's portrait. He hadn't talked to it in days, hadn't needed to. I did it, he said quietly. I kept them. All 8. They're mine now. Legal and permanent. He could almost hear her voice in his head, warm with approval. I'm proud of you. I miss you. I'll always miss you. But Sarah, I'm not dead anymore. I'm living again. And I think you'd like them. I think you'd love them. A small hand slipped into his. He looked down to find Abigail standing beside him, studying the portrait with solemn eyes. Is that Mrs. Mackenzie? Yes. Her name was Sarah. She's beautiful. She was. Ethan squeezed the girl's hand gently, inside and out. Do you think she minds? About us being here? Ethan knelt so he was eye level with her. I think she's happy that this house has laughter in it again, that her husband isn't slowly dying of loneliness, that 8 children have a safe place to grow up. Abigail considered this, then nodded. I hope so, because I really like it here. Good, because this is your home. Forever. She hugged him, fierce and sudden, then ran off to find Emma. Ethan stood and looked at Sarah's portrait one more time. Thank you, he whispered, for teaching me how to love. I'm using those lessons well. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came the slow, steady work of healing. Benjamin, now 15, began working the ranch alongside Hank. His natural talent with horses became evident. Where other men used force, Benjamin used patience, and the animals responded to him like he spoke their language. One evening in March, Ethan found the boy in the stable, brushing down a mare who'd been skittish and difficult when they'd bought her. You have a gift, Ethan observed. Benjamin shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. I just listen to them. Most people don't. That's what makes it a gift. Ethan leaned against the stall door. One day, this ranch will be yours. You know that, right? The boy's hands stilled on the brush. What? You're my oldest son.
When I'm gone, all of this becomes yours. The land, the cattle, the horses, everything I've built. But I'm not your real son. Yes, you are. Ethan's voice was firm. Blood doesn't make a family. Choice does. You're as real a son as any man could ask for. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears.
At 15, he was caught between boyhood and manhood. Tall and gangly, his voice breaking at odd moments. But in that instant, he looked very young.
I'll make you proud, Papa. I swear it.
You already do. Every day.
Catherine blossomed with education. The school teacher in Cheyenne reported that she was reading at a level far beyond her years, devouring books with a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. When she announced she wanted to be a teacher herself one day, Ethan immediately began investigating normal schools where she could train.
You do that?
Catherine asked, stunned.
Send me away to school?
If that's your dream, then yes, though you'll have to come home for summers. I'm not letting you go entirely. She threw her arms around his neck.
Thank you, Papa, for believing I could be something.
Michael's anger slowly transformed into purpose.
He discovered he had a head for numbers, could calculate cattle prices and feed costs faster than Ethan could write them down. More importantly, he found a way to channel his rage into something productive.
Papa,
he said one evening over dinner,
I've been reading about the orphanage laws. Did you know they're different in every territory? In some places, kids have no rights at all.
I didn't know that.
I want to change it. When I'm grown, I want to be a lawyer and write laws that protect children like us.
Ethan set down his fork, regarding the boy with new respect. That's a worthy goal.
You think I could do it?
Michael, you survived things that would break most adults. You can do anything you set your mind to. The boy smiled, and it reached his eyes for once. Emma's voice grew stronger every day. The selective mutism that had stolen 6 months of her speech faded as she realized she was truly safe. She discovered she loved to sing, her voice clear and pure. Reverend Whitfield asked if she'd join the church choir, and she did, standing up in front of the congregation every Sunday without fear. Luke recovered fully from pneumonia and became inseparable from the horses. At 6 years old, he could already ride better than men twice his age. He had no memory of his birth mother, only of Catherine caring for him and Ethan saving him. And that was enough. Rose, now 4, barely remembered life before the ranch. To her, this had always been home. Ethan had always been Papa, and the world had always been safe. And Abigail, the 8th child who wasn't a Crawford by blood but was a Mackenzie by choice, found her calling in helping others. She volunteered at the new orphanage that opened after Judge Blackwood's operation was shut down, sitting with the scared children, the scarred children, the ones nobody wanted, and telling them her story. Telling them that damaged wasn't the same as worthless. The years passed. 1886 brought cattle prices that made Ethan wealthier than he'd ever imagined. He used the money to expand the ranch, to build a proper school on the property so his children could learn without the long trip to town. 1887 brought Benjamin's 16th birthday and his first real romance with Clara Morrison, who'd been patiently waiting for the boy to notice she existed as more than Hank's daughter. 1888 brought Catherine's acceptance to the Denver Normal School, along with tears and promises to write every week. 1889 brought Michael's first published article about orphan rights in the territorial newspaper, and the beginning of his reputation as someone who fought for the powerless. 1890 brought Emma's solo performance at the church's Easter service, her voice so beautiful that grown men wept. And through it all, 8 children grew into young adults who knew they were loved. Christmas 1890 found them gathered again around that same long table.
But everything had changed. Benjamin was 19 now, engaged to Clara, already managing half the ranch operations. Catherine was 17 and home from her first semester of teacher training, full of excitement about education reform. Michael was 15 and insufferable with teenage righteousness about social justice. Emma was 12 and had just been offered a scholarship to study music in Denver. Luke was 10 and could break any horse on the ranch. Rose was 8 and declared she wanted to be a doctor like Dr. Warren. Abigail was 14 and had started her own charity to help scarred and disabled children. Ethan sat at the head of the table and looked at the family he'd built from broken pieces, and his heart was full. "I want to say something," he announced, standing with some difficulty. His ankle, never properly healed from that night in the blizzard, had stiffened with age and weather.
8 faces turned to him, ranging from 19 years old to 8, all of them his. 5 years ago, I stood in an orphanage and bought 8 children I didn't know. I told myself I was saving you, that I was being noble and charitable and good. He paused, emotion thick in his throat. But the truth is, you saved me. I was a dead man walking. I'd given up on everything except breathing, and then you came into my life and forced me to live again.
"Papa,"
Benjamin started, but Ethan held up a hand. "Let me finish. You're not my children by blood, but you're my children by choice, and that makes you more mine than biology ever could. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Choice does. Waking up every day and deciding to stay, to fight, to build something together. That's what makes us a family." He raised his glass. "To 5 years. To the battles we've won and the ones still to come. To growing up and growing old together. To the family we chose." "To family," they echoed, glasses raised. And as Ethan looked around that table, at faces that had been hollow with hunger and were now bright with health, at children who had been broken and were now whole, he thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, standing in the back of an orphanage, watching Silas Thornton hit a child, making a split-second decision that would change 9 lives forever. He thought he was rescuing orphans. He hadn't realized he was the one being rescued. The years continued their march. Benjamin married Clara in 1891 in a ceremony where all 7 of his siblings stood up beside him. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah.